Yes. Share button.
छोटा
और
बटन एक ही बटन बस
तो इधर नीचे
okay
तो
okay good afternoon students so before I start today's lecture I would like to know if any one of you have any questions from the previous lecture on plagiarism and other issues. So if anyone has any specific questions, you can unmute yourself and mm, ask your questions.
Excuse me, sir. This is
Yeah,
Satya here.
yeah.
This is a bit different than like it will not go directly to plagiarism. My question. So,
Okay.
what my question is that suppose we use text which is generated by AI. So, as we see currently, so what is the present scenario regarding using such text in our works? So, any
I don't think there have been any guidelines which have come out so far on this recent phenomena. But whatever it is, whether you have written the text yourself or you have generated the text using AI or whichever method.
yeah.
So once you generate the text, and what the plagiarism software would do is simply compare whatever you have generated or written or whichever thing you have done with the earlier existing data.
Yeah.
And if it happens to coincide as per its algorithm, then it will say that whatever you have put out is plagiarized. So it doesn't matter whether you have used AI to generate your paper or you have used your own brain to generate your paper. So ultimately, what matters is that the plagiarism software, it looks for similarities in text as per certain algorithms, and if it is satisfied that it is matching and there is a text copying, then it will simply say that you have copied the text.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Any other question, please? Okay, so maybe it will be useful if you can share your questions in the chat box, or you can also, if you wish, you can uh, write to me, and my email is there here. So any one of you would like to write to me, you are most welcome. And so please do send in your questions, because only then I would get to know how it's going and what is the extent of your understanding. So my email is here. So anyone is interested, they can write to me also, write in your questions, and I'll be quite happy to answer. So in this lecture, what I will initially do is continue a little bit with this plagiarism issue, because I think it is one of the most important aspects which everyone should know about, and should be aware of this issue, plagiarism thing completely, so that you don't make any mistakes, because you all of you are freshly into your PhDs, and though of course some of you may already have some research experience, but that doesn't really matter. So I think you must know what are the dangers of plagiarism. And so in this regard, I thought I should extend this a little bit more. So, so that was what I was talking last time, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And I also told you about why plagiarism occurs and how it occurs, etc. So today I wanted to discuss some issues, both whatever UGC has put out in its Gazette of 2018, and then some case histories which I thought would illustrate how this plagiarism actually takes place and how it gets caught out also. So, as I said earlier, UGC has very clearly defined that plagiarism means practice of taking someone else's work or idea and passing them as one's own. So now UGC actually in its gazette has assigned certain guidelines. It has given out certain guidelines on how to curb plagiarism. And so they have written that every higher educational institution, which includes universities or IITs, institutes, or even research institutes like BARC or any of the component units of DAE. So they have specified that each of these HEIs, higher education institutions, must actually establish certain mechanisms and in order to enhance awareness about how to conduct responsible research and also promote academic integrity and prevent plagiarism. So specifically on curbing plagiarism, they have put out certain guidelines. So one of the first things they have said is that every institution must actually implement some technology based mechanism like a software or anything like that to ensure the documents which emanate from that institute like thesis, dissertations or publications or any other documents, official documents, scientific documents are free of plagiarism at the time of the submission itself. And the means through which this can be done is, as I said, through using certain softwares like Urkund or Authenticate and many others which are now available in the market. And now they have also defined that the mechanism as defined above, like these technology-based mechanisms, they should be made accessible to everyone in the institution who is actually doing research work. So this can include students, it can be faculty, it can be staff, anyone who is engaged in research work. And then very importantly for you people, every student submitting a thesis, dissertation to the institute shall submit an undertaking, okay, indicating that the document has been prepared by the student himself or herself and that the document is his original work and free of any plagiarism. So now how to ensure it is free of any plagiarism? So you have to submit your document to the institution's plagiarism detection department or the section where they will run it through the software which has been made available to the institution and then give you an output which will determine whether the said document has been plagiarized or not plagiarized. So then again, the institution also has to develop a certain policy on plagiarism, and then this has to be, of course, approved by the relevant statutory authorities. Okay, and then the supervisor also has to submit a certificate indicating that the work done by the student or the researcher under him is plagiarism free. And also, all copies of this master's and PhD thesis have to be actually put in a digital repository, which is called the Shodh Ganga e-repository. This is a very useful repository which has been made available by the UGC. And in fact, you can find almost every thesis that has been submitted in the Indian universities at this e-repository. So apart from this, the individual institutions should also create institutional repositories at the website, which can include all these theses or papers or dissertations and other in-house newsletters or publications, etc. Then there are certain guidelines on responsibilities on how this plagiarism issue is handled at the institution level. So UGC has decreed that every institution should have two bodies. The first one is called a Departmental Academic Integrity Panel, okay, which is a committee or a body which takes care of the issues within a particular department. Okay, so now this particular if there is some instance of plagiarism which has come to its notice through someone or whatever means, so the first step is that this departmental academic integrity panel should actually go through this charge of plagiarism or whatever, and then give its recommendation to its next higher body, which is based on the institution itself, and that is called the Institutional Academic Integrity Panel. And there are also guidelines on how these committees are composed. So for the departmental committee, the head of department is the chairman, and there has to be at least one member who is a senior academician from outside this department, and who can be nominated by the head of the institution. And then, of course, another person who is also well versed with this anti-plagiarism tools, software, etc., should be compulsorily be a member of this committee. And then going to the higher committee, which is the Institutional Academic Integrity Panel, the chairman would be the pro vice chancellor or the dean or a very senior academician of the institute. And then among the members, there has to be at least one senior academician who is other than the chairman to be nominated by the head of the institution or the director. And then one member who is nominated by the institution who has to be from outside that institution. And then again, one person who is well versed with anti-plagiarism tools. So this is how the committees are composed of. And so the first level is at the departmental level, and the departmental level makes certain recommendations to the institutional committee, which will take further action on the issue based on the guidelines issued by UGC. Okay, so now I would like to take up one or two cases of plagiarism in detail so that you'll understand how these things actually have been caught out, and then how they have been punished, etc. So for the first one is that there was a paper which was published in the journal Biotechnology Letters in 1989. And this was a paper in biological sciences, probably biochemistry. This paper was on the effect of amino acids on the production of a drug, which is cyclosporin A. Then in January 1996, okay, almost 8 years after this, there appeared a paper in Applied Microbiology and Biotechnology, that's an international journal, by K. Balakrishnan and Ashok Pandey from a CSIR laboratory. And the title was Influence of Amino Acids on the Biosynthesis of Cyclosporin A. Now, what happened in 1997, there was a complaint which was received by the editor of this second journal, that is Applied Microbiology and Biotechnology, that this paper which appeared in 96 was actually a plagiarized version of an earlier paper which appeared in 1989. So then the whole action started. So let's see how similar these two papers are. So on the right side, you see the original paper which was published in 89. The titles itself are pretty close. Effect of amino acids on the production of cyclosporin A by Tolypocladium inflatum. And here it is influence of amino acids on the biosynthesis. See, biosynthesis and production is quite similar of cyclosporin A by the same bacterium, Tolypocladium inflatum. So these were two authors, K. Balakrishnan and Ashok Pandey from RRL. At that time, it was called RRL Trivandrum. So it was a CSIR laboratory. So let's see what they have done. So in the abstract itself, the whole problem started. So you can see now in the abstract, it is written an indigenously isolated strain of this bacterium, when grown as a suspension culture in semi-synthetic and synthetic media, produce cyclosporin A. Now we can see it is a simple paraphrasing of this sentence. Cyclosporin A was produced in semi-synthetic and synthetic media by Tolipocladium inflatum in suspension culture. So the first sentence itself was plagiarized. Then follows the next line, and these people are quite clever. What they have done was they have juxtaposed different sentences at different points. Okay, so the next line in the original paper reads as L-valine increased the specific production of cyclosporin A by 62% in semi-synthetic media and by 4 times in synthetic media compared to an unsupplemented control culture. So what these guys wrote, they put it here. They wrote that L-valine increased the specific production of cyclosporin A, same words, by 75%. Of course, it's a small change they have made. God only knows whether it was really 62% or 70%, whether they have really done the experiment or not. In semi-synthetic medium, and by 10 times, instead of 4 times here, they have written 10 times in synthetic medium compared to an unsupplemented control culture. Unsupplemented control culture. Okay. Again, very same sentence. Then D-valine had no stimulatory effect on the production. And somewhere here you can read that D-valine had no stimulating effect on the production. And then they go on, the presence of amino acids in exponential growth phase ensured optimal production. So you can see that they have very cleverly put these words up and down. Experiments with different times of addition of L-valine indicated the amino acid may need to be present in exponential growth phase for optimal production. Okay. So same thing, optimal production. Then, and he wrote here, experiment in which L-valine was added at different times. Okay. 4 grams per liter was the optimum concentration. 4 grams per liter was the optimum concentration of exogenous L-valine. Exogenous L-valine. In contrast, exogenous L-methionine, on the other hand, in contrast has been changed to on the other hand, exogenous sarcosine and L-methionine. They have simply put one word later and one word before. Okay, tended to diminish drug production, tended to diminish the production of cyclosporin A. So literally in the abstract itself, the whole copying started. Okay. Then it goes on in the introduction. Okay, so in the introduction, you can see directed synthesis of cyclosporin A and its analogs in fermentations, where the composition and titer of each analog produced were strongly determined by externally supplemented amino acid. Now you can see the same sentence here, directed synthesis of cyclosporin A, several analogs, composition and titer of each analog produced were strongly determined by kind of externally supplemented amino acid. This may be due to lack of specificity of cyclosporin synthetase. Okay. Again, this may be due to lack of specificity of cyclosporin synthetase. Okay. Then one more sentence. What was this? A general feature of multifunctional synthetases involved in non-ribosomal synthesis of secondary metabolites, etc., etc. And again, same thing. A general feature of multifunctional synthetases involved in non-ribosomal synthesis of secondary metabolites of etc., etc. Peptide antibiotics, peptide antibiotics. So you can see in the introduction itself, they started copying. Then they wrote, in this study, effect of several amino acid components of cyclosporin A was investigated. In this study, effects of several members of cyclosporin A molecule on drug production by T inflatum were investigated. Okay. Then initial culture was adapted to glucose through so and so, so and so. Again, same thing. Initial culture was adapted to glucose. Now, if you see this such a one-to-one correspondence, and how can you say that the later paper was an original paper? Okay, And the authors tried to strongly refute that they have copied their paper from this 1989 paper. And in fact, it happens that one of the authors was a fairly senior scientist of the CSIR. Okay. So same thing, seed cultures were prepared using a seed stock culture at 5% volume. Same thing, seed cultures were prepared using as inoculum a seed stock culture at 5% volume to volume. Okay. So it goes on like that. So there are many such almost copying one-to-one correspondences and right through the paper. And they have also copied even the figures, slightly changing the terminology and things like that. And but all the same, most of the paper figures were also almost similar. So amino acids showed remarkable effect on drug production. So you can see it showed a remarkable enhancing effect on cyclosporin A production in both media. Okay. And the same again, some 62% here, 75% there, and 10 times over there and 4 times over here. And again, most of it was very much similar. And some sentences were straight away one to one. And even the conclusion of the paper, this is the later paper, in short, constituent amino acids of this molecule, such as L-valine and L-leucine, may affect the production by assuming one or more roles, such as precursor, inducer, and or developmental regulator. Now you can see the same thing here. May affect the drug production. Okay, here he has written production of the drug, and here it is drug production. By assuming, again same lines, one or more roles such as precursor, inducer, and or developmental regulator. Now, which person who reads this, even a non-biologist, even a physicist or anyone, okay, will simply say that this is simply a copy of this earlier paper, isn't it? And again, you can see the last line. Some amino acids are believed to act as inducers. Some amino acids may act as inducers, which must be added in the exponential growth, etc., etc. And here also same thing, affected during vegetative cell growth. And here also you can see affected during vegetative cell growth. Okay. So finally, what happened? The editor-in-chief of the journal was one Dr. Alexander Steinbuchel. He confronted the scientist, the senior scientist, corresponding scientist, Dr. Ashok Pandey, with the evidence and decided that this was the action taken. The manuscripts from K. Balakrishnan and A. Pandey will no longer be considered for can everyone mute, please? Okay, thank you. So, yeah, so will no longer be considered for publication in this journal. And the editors-in-chiefs of other journals covering aspects of microbiology and or biotechnology will be informed about this matter. So now you can see the kind of name and shame which these people have incurred with this act of scientific misconduct. So now they would have been prevented from publishing in this particular journal itself. Not only that, all the other journals of microbiology and biotechnology editors were informed by this particular journal editor that these two authors have actually plagiarized an earlier paper. See, once you get a stamp that you have done a scientific misconduct like plagiarism, it is going to be hell of a problem to publish your papers later in any journal, because nowadays with information explosion, it's very fast for people to know about others, and the information goes across very fast, and within no time it will be known to everyone that you have committed a scientific misconduct, and that will be forever put against your name. And once you have been charged with this kind of misdemeanor, it is very difficult to turn the tables back. But of course, what kind of punishment they would have incurred, other than that, one cannot say. it depends. Depends from person to person. And since, of course, this particular issue occurred in 1997, at that time there were no guidelines which were issued by UGC. This happened very recently, and that was as early as 2018. So now you can be rest assured that if such a thing such a thing happens now, not only student, there will be a charge for the student, there will be a punishment for the student, a punishment for the guide or the faculty, and they are quite severe, which I have already discussed in my previous lecture. So now we go to another celebrated case. This is the case of Dr. B.S. Rajput from Oman University. So these two authors, S.C. Joshi and B.S. Rajput, they published a paper in the Europhysics letters. This was a paper in nuclear physics, axion dilation black holes with SL2Z symmetry through APT FGP model. And those of you who are already aware of this case need not worry about it. But those who don't know, Professor Rajput at that time was the Vice Chancellor of the Oman University. And when this paper came out, it was first discovered by one of the faculty members of the same university in the same department. And that faculty member raised a red flag and then and put out the news that, look, this paper is actually a plagiarization of an earlier paper which appeared way back in 1996. So this paper appeared in 2002. Okay, so this was actually the charge was that this was a plagiarization of the paper by Renata Kalosh in the journal Physical Review D. So then, of course, all hell broke loose, and Professor Rajput being, of course, the Vice Chancellor, the first action which was taken was that the person who raised the news that this was a plagiarization, that person was actually suspended from the department. But fortunately, what happened was that there were a number of other scientists in the country who noticed this matter, and then they raised the issue with the other higher authorities, and there was a letter which was collectively written by leading scientists of the country and also from abroad, which included some Nobel laureates also. And a letter was written at that time to the President of India, who was Professor Abdul Salam. And then after all that hue and cry was raised, there was a committee which was formed to look into this case of plagiarization. And the committee presented its report in February 2003, upholding all these plagiarism charges, after which, of course, Professor Rajput had to resign from the as VC of the university. So now you can see how bad the things can go on. Of course, Professor Rajput was very vehement in refuting that it was he who had done this. He said he put the whole blame on the student, who was this person S.C. Joshi, and he said that the student had written up the manuscript and even posted it without informing him. But then, you see, this is what happens when you put your name as an author in a paper. You are also taking part responsibility for whatever is there in that paper. You cannot simply lend your name or try to force your name into a paper and then later say that look, I have not been a part of this paper, I don't know anything about it, it was my student who wrote it, or whatever. So all those points hold any water. Okay. So finally, unfortunately, Professor Rajput had to step down from the Vice Chancellorship. And of course, there was a very severe comment, an editorial comment in Europhysics letters, saying that this article contains no results, instead plagiarizes from the article so and so, which appeared in Physical Review D. And apart from some well-known introductory review material and the first half discussion, the text of the paper has been copied literally from the other article. And then the editor goes on to apologize, okay, apologize to the earlier author, Kalosh, and also regrets that this has not been noticed during the referring process. See, one major issue which journals have is that they don't like to admit that they have made a mistake. See, the very fact that the paper has got published would mean that the referees also didn't notice, didn't bother to check or whatever. It has gone through all those checks and then came out in print. So once it happens, the journals or the editors of the journals don't like to admit that there was a mistake which on part of the journal. But it does happen, and nowadays with the amount of manuscripts which are submitted to journals, especially to high impact journals, it is very, very difficult to detect these kind of things at that point of time. Of course, now things are improving and many journals have very, very powerful softwares which try to detect at least plagiarism of text. Okay. So that's the first thing which one can notice whether some text has been plagiarized. So that itself gives an indicator about a possible plagiarism occurring there. Then I will show you about one self-plagiarism case. See, this is another thing which happens very often in, I would say, in this part of the world. And again, the problem is that the pressure to publish this thing called publish or perish thing. See, people want to, by hook or crook, publish the results. So one thing which people try to do, and this is against the ethics, is that they write the same manuscript. I mean, they submit the same manuscript to two different journals or three different journals. Maybe they have some small changes in the text here and there, but essentially the same results which are presented to submitted to at least more than one journal. Why do you do that? That is because you feel that, okay, if the paper doesn't go through in journal 1, let's see whether it goes through journal 2. So that kind of an outlook which there, and this actually is wrong because you at the time of submission of a paper, you give an undertaking that you have not published the results, the same results in any other journal or presented the results in any other journal or any other conference, etc. You have to give us a undertaking. In spite of that, people do this. So this was these two authors, Srijan Das and Van Dowd. They published a review in RSA Advances. RSA Advances is a very prestigious journal. And this happened in 2014. The paper was accepted in April 2014. This was on the advances in photocatalysts towards carbon dioxide conversion. So it's a chemistry paper. And the same year, they published another review in another journal, Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews, which was accepted in July 2014. So now what happened actually was both the manuscripts were sent to these respective journals in the last week of February of 2014. So now let's see what has happened. So this was the second which came later. This was the paper which came later. Photocatalytic CO2 transformation into fuel, a review on advances in photocatalyst and photoreactor. And the paper which came out in RSC Advances was that a review on advances in photocatalysts towards CO2 conversion. Same authors, same affiliation. And both of them got accepted. Then the problem started. Okay. So now you can see how the two papers were similar. This was I think this was the RSC paper, and this is the other energy review paper. Energy consumption from fossil fuels have great importance. Energy produced from fossil fuels has great importance because they can be burned, oxidized to carbon dioxide and water, because the latter can be burned, oxidized carbon dioxide and water. And now you can see, you can go on literally reading the whole thing, and everything is same. According to British Petroleum Statistical Review of World Energy 2013, the British Petroleum Statistical Review of 2013 estimated the rate of energy consumption. The consumption rates of energy have shown upward trend. So there was a very nice paraphrasing which was done for the two manuscripts, but essentially almost it was the same matter and same result, and everything else was same, and some terms were absolutely same. Now you can see that other renewable sources like wind, hydroelectric, and tide ocean currents. Other renewable sources like wind, hydroelectric, and tide ocean current provide almost 2.1 terawatt, 1.5 terawatt, and less than 2 terawatt, same numbers here, of energy respectively. Then conversely, these renewable resources are quite limited to meet overall energy demand. On the other hand, energy generated from these sources is quite small, quite limited, quite small, or that required to meet the global energy crisis. Okay. And again, across the whole paper, they were all almost the same kind of similarities in both the manuscripts. So you can see almost one-to-one correspondence, and some of them are totally same. So you can see that original, infinite, and mostly import independent resource. Indigenous, inexhaustible, and mostly import independent resource. Okay, increase sustainability, reduce pollution, decrease pollution, lower the cost of mitigating climate change, and keep fossil fuel prices lower than other means, and keep fossil fuel prices lower than previously. So, so this was again brought to the notice that the paper which appeared later, that was in this journal of what was that, energy and renewable sources or something like that. So the editor has given a retraction notice saying that this paper has been retracted. So it has come to journal's attention. The paper bears substantial similarity with an earlier published article by the same authors in RSC Advances. And they give this condition. See, one of the conditions of submission of a paper for publication is that authors declare explicitly that the paper is their own work and not published or under consideration for publication elsewhere. So this is undertaking which the author has to mandatorily give to the journal. So reuse of any data should be appropriately quoted or cited. And the community takes a very strong view of this matter, and apologies are offered to the readers of the journal that this was not detected during the submission process. Okay. So unfortunately, since the two manuscripts were submitted to two different journals at the same time, it would have been almost impossible for the reviewers also to notice, unless of course the reviewers were same in either both the journals. Okay. So it's very difficult to detect this at the time of submission itself. So what, see, there's an apology even to the readers, because the readers who read the manuscript are basically wasting their time. They have been made a fool. Okay. So the readers are also made fools because this is a self-plagiarized paper, and unnecessarily you are wasting time in reading a self-plagiarized paper which has already been published elsewhere. So this again, I think I might have talked about it earlier. So how do you have closure for a paper which has been plagiarized? So the only way for a complete closure is that a complete retraction of the plagiarized paper, which indicates a full closure, okay, to the author who is the victim, okay, whose work or idea has been actually plagiarized. But this complete retraction of papers which plagiarize does not happen very often, and it's only the most rare cases where there's no other way except to uh, remove it or retract it, then only it is done. So usually what happens is that there is an erratum which is issued, which again I think I have talked about in my previous lecture. So either an erratum showing that saying that by error we have missed something, or an apology issued by the authors, by the errant authors, or a correction. Okay, but even if this kind of a thing happens, there is no real proper closure, because these apologies or corrections or an errata, they will appear much later after the paper, the suspect paper has been published. And as I said, no one really bothers to read about the errata and apologies and corrections, because no one these days has the time or energy to go through the entire journal, etc. You try to see the papers which are of interest, academic interest to you, that's all. So even if there is a apology which has been published later, it makes really not much of a difference, because nobody bothers to read that. But only one possibility where this can be stopped is that this apology or an erratum or a correction which has been published later, that has to be linked to the paper which has actually carried out the plagiarization. So once if it is linked uh, strongly to that paper, the main paper, then there is some kind of a closure, because whenever a person tries to see that paper or download that paper, and paper which has done this plagiarization, he will automatically get to see that there was an erratum issued, or there was an apology issued, or there was a correction made. So then in that situation, of course, there is some semblance of a closure for this plagiarism. So now when you come to Indian victims of plagiarism, okay, who will protect our Indian victims of plagiarism, especially when our students are concerned? See, unlike in the West or the US, where we had the Office of Research Integrity, there was no such statutory body so far to deal with cases of plagiarism and research in India. And whatever came out in our country was because of the public uproar. People noticed that there was a plagiarism which has occurred, and they make a big issue in the social media, etc. And only then the issue comes to notice, and then this were dealt on ad hoc basis, and then treated like the case of the Kumaon University issue. So that was the situation till recently. But now with this establishment of UGC CARE, so I had talked about UGC CARE in my very first lecture, which is the Consortium for Academic and Research Ethics. So UGC has established this body, and this body is expected to fulfill this objective by acting like a watchdog for our scientists and students especially, and provide at least some defense mechanism to victims of plagiarism. Now, another issue which I wanted to talk to you about is this out of the box thinking, okay, path breaking research. See, our students are quite bright, and quite often you find that there can be brilliant ideas which are emanating from our students, and it's not necessarily that they come from very top institutions. Okay, you can have even mediocre universities, etc., who can be having very brilliant students who have the ideas. They may not be able to put their ideas into action, but at least they have the ideas. So now, how do you protect? Such students, and how should such students protect themselves? Okay, so that is something which the students should know. See, now, if you are doing some really extraordinary research work, what you call, say, a path-breaking research work, then you must make all efforts to disseminate this knowledge which you have. See, unless you disseminate the knowledge or publish this knowledge, nothing is going to happen. I mean, somebody else will either take that idea from you, or it will just remain unknown till someone else comes along and discovers. Okay. So when you know that you have something interesting in hand, you have to immediately try and disseminate this knowledge in the right way among the people whom in your area of research whom you feel would matter if when they read your paper, okay, or when they listen to your talk or whatever. Okay, so you have to some way, in some manner, try to disseminate this idea or knowledge which you have. So how to do this? I'll give you two examples. In our country, what has happened? One of which in our country, that is example of water on the moon. We had the Chandrayaan-1 mission where it had what was called a moon impact probe, MIP, and this moon impact probe had three instruments, and one of them was called CHASE, which was called this Chandra's Altitudinal Composition Explorer. And what this was basically, it was a neutral mass spectrometer. And see, this water on the moon issue was basically there were a number of groups which were trying to, there was a race to find out this issue of water on the moon. NASA was after it, ISRO was after this, and NASA sent a probe to the moon, which landed on the moon and then moved about on the surface of the moon like a rover, and then collected samples and analyzed them there. But of course, our missions did not have that kind of technology. But then we had some brilliant minds which designed this mass spectrometer, which will, as a part of this moon impact probe, which goes and crashes on the moon, while it is descending on the surface of the moon, the lunar surface, this probe will actually measure the fumes on the surface of the moon, and then try to see whether any instances of water was there. So it so happened that this did detect the presence of very strong presence of water on the moon. Okay, then I'll discuss this in more detail a little later. The other example was, so then what happened was, unfortunately, this water on the moon issue, we lost the race because NASA published their results before our people published their results. The other example was of that of high-TC superconductors. This was 1986 by the famous duo of Petnots and Muller, who discovered these compounds. And then what they did was they published their results immediately in a national journals, and through that they got a priority. So now let's see what happened with this water on the moon issue. See, as I said, if you are doing path-breaking research, you must take special care to disseminate this knowledge at the earliest opportunity on a suitable forum. Now, this probe of Chandrayaan mission, it did find water, evidence of water on the moon. But then what happened was, this was, I think, sometime in June or July of, I think this was in 2008 or something, 2009. So the authors, the concerned people who were in charge of this mission, they were trying to publish the results first in Science. It was rejected. Then they sent it to Nature. That also was rejected on some grounds, okay, whatever grounds. See, when you send a paper to a journal like Science or Nature, you have to be, your results and manuscript has to be really perfect, okay. If there is any evidence of any chance of ambiguity or whatever, immediately it gets thrown out. So unfortunately, our people were after Science or Nature publishing in these journals, and then they lost valuable time. And before that, I think on 24th September, NASA published it in Science. And on the same day, of course, ISRO had a public press conference, which in which they said that they had found it 3 months earlier. But then the question was asked, what have you been doing for the last 3 months? There was no answer. And unfortunately, so this is what happened. But what they could have done is that they could have simply uploaded their results, initial results or whatever, in say an Indian journal like Pramana or Current Science. We had such journals with us. It could have been done easily. It wouldn't have mattered which kind of journal it was, as long as you could have laid claim for discovering the evidence for water. Or at least one could have used the preprint repository like archives. We have condensed matter archives, we have biochemistry archives, we have astrophysics archives. So these are all archives which are now recognized. Okay, when you submit your preprint in these archives, it is now recognized that yes, you have already done this research and you have put it up as an archive in this forum. Okay. So this is where our scientists went wrong. They were after big journals trying to publish there. Only if they had thought of loading the results in the astrophysics archive, I'm sure NASA could not have avoided referring to our scientists' results, which came first. So of course, ultimately they published the results in another journal, but then it didn't matter much because the race was already lost. Then the next one was the high thesis superconductor story, which was a very successful story. And Betnors and Muller, they were in this IBM Zurich Research Laboratory in Switzerland. And when they did the experiments and they found the results, okay, I'll show you the results first. Okay, they found this result here where the resistivity of the materials, they made several samples, and of some samples they found that the resistivity has a very sharp drop at a very fairly high temperature, which is near room temperature. Okay, so they knew that they were onto something very big. This was something which was not seen before by anyone earlier. And this was the first such experiment which showed a possible superconducting transition near about room temperature. So Betnors and Muller were at least intelligent enough to realize that they were onto something very, very interesting. But then they had some problems with the result, because they knew that the samples were not clean. They had 3 different phases in their samples, and they were not sure which was the particular phase which was actually giving rise to the superconductivity. Okay, so realizing that these problems were there, they knew that it would be very difficult for them to publish them in a very important journal like Science or Nature, etc., or even Physical Review B. So then they did the next best thing possible. So what did they do? They tried to, they went to their boss, who was on this editorial board of this journal called Zeitschrift für Physik. Okay, see, this paper appeared in Zeitschrift für Physik Condensed Matter in 1986. This Zeitschrift für Physik is actually a national journal of Germany. At that time, it was rather a nondescript journal. Nobody knew outside Germany much about this journal. In fact, when they published this in sometime in June or July, nobody knew about the result at all. And I think it was much later in the December or January of that succeeding year, there was a conference in Bangalore where these results were actually presented, and then all hell broke loose because it was everyone noticed that, look, there was something interesting here. But then by that time, these two guys, they were intelligent enough to influence their boss to go and submit these results in this journal. And even in this journal, for this journal, these results were not really up to the mark because they were all impure samples. But then they managed somehow or the other to get through and publish their paper in this Zeitschrift für journal, Zeitschrift für Physik journal. So rest is history. Now they were the first to discover this. They had their timestamp, and this was the last paper of any major importance which they published. And after that, there were so many other groups in the world who worked much more and much faster, and then publish much better results, which were much better than what these people had published. But then they had the timestamp of the original paper, which appeared much before anyone else, and people had to cite this paper, come what may, whatever their results were. So that's how it is when you have some really big idea, try to publish as soon as possible, or at least put it up in the preprint archive. Now there was another very interesting paper. This was on skyrmions, which is now the in thing in physics at this point of time. And my colleagues in Indore, Dr. Ganeshan and his student Samadam, they had found some results, very interesting results on manganese silicon. And they actually found the presence of skyrmions. And then, unfortunately, they did not upload their results in the archives, but then they submitted it to a journal called Physica Statis Solidi, which took some time. But of course, it was published in January 2013 and published online. But then, of course, later there was a paper which was published in PRL, which is essentially the same results, okay? And they did not refer to this except it was added in the proof that they came to know that this paper has, these results were actually published earlier, and they added a note saying that we became aware of another specific study of MNSI, which also detected the skyrmion lattice phase and the change or the transition from first to second order that we report here. But now you see, if only these people had actually uploaded their results on, say, archives, probably these people wouldn't have escaped that that result, because everyone reads archives these days, whether it's condensed matter or biochemistry or whichever. Now, so whatever the result of this, see, I attended one conference a little later in 2015, and there were hundreds of talks, I mean, papers and many talks on this skyrmions, and everyone was referring to this paper, but nobody referred to the paper from here. So this is how the world works, and so one has to be very protective about your results if you find that they are path-breaking or out-of-the-box results. Okay, now I quickly go through some the ways in which a plagiarism check is done. So this actually is a part of my my students' thesis, and you see the problem of plagiarism softwares. See, it has picked up similarities. What are the similarities here? Similarities picked up is my address. My address appears in all the papers, so it has picked it up as a similarity. Then sometimes it has picked up the references as similarities, but then problem is you have to cite references, and references can be same in many papers, okay? So it has picked up those things as similarity. So overall, of course, it shows that the total is around 8% or something, okay? So this is the problem with plagiarism checks which exist now. And of course, as I said, when you submit your thesis, you have to give an exclusion certificate, a self-plagiarism exclusion certificate, which says that these are the papers which you have published. I think this question was asked by someone in my earlier lectures, that you had to state that these are the papers which have been published by me, and the results from these papers are also part of my thesis. So that kind of a statement has to be made and submitted to the university. So you can say that the contents of these chapters, so and so, so and so, have been published in these two papers, and this is the name of the journal, and this is the reference. Okay. So then again, talking about plagiarism software, I mean, are they really the answer? In reality, it is yes and no. Sometimes they do help to detect text plagiarism, but then there are many other things which they don't detect. Okay, so like this person has published an article in Nature which says that I have been testing plagiarism detection software for the past 15 years, and this was published in 2019. The results are often hard to interpret, difficult to navigate, and sometimes just wrong. Many systems report false positives for common phrases long names of institutions, etc., etc. So ultimately, she says that a spot check with an internal search engine using 3 to 5 words from a paragraph or a particularly nice turn of phrase can uncover copies. So searching for a reference that looks odd might turn easy. Okay. So that decision has to be taken whether a paper has been plagiarized or not. The final decision has to be taken by the human being. Okay. So do we have time? Oh, time is over. Okay, so maybe I will stop here, and I will request if you have any questions. You see, I have a little more data, but I don't think I have. I wanted to talk about redundant publications, but I don't know. Maybe I'll continue in my next lecture. So, can I invite questions at this point? Any questions, please? Anyone has questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Any questions? Okay, so I hope next time you can come with more questions, and we'll meet on 13th. Next lecture is on 13th. Yeah. Thank you.